The skies of Vexilin 7 were choked with smoke, streaked with fiery red as the dying sun cast its final light over the war-torn world. Sergeant David Thompson, a human soldier, moved cautiously through the ruins, his boots crunching on broken glass and debris. His squad had pushed ahead, securing the perimeter after another skirmish with the Xarnok Dominion forces, but something pulled David back. He wasn't sure what it was, a gut feeling perhaps that made him linger behind. The war between the United Terran Forces and the Xarnok Dominion had been raging for years, reducing prosperous colonies to wastelands. Vexilin 7 was no exception. Once a thriving hub, it was now a desolate graveyard of twisted metal, collapsed buildings, and the distant echoes of past lives. David's helmet visor flickered, picking up faint heat signatures through the haze. Most were fading corpses, but then he noticed a tiny pulse, weak and unsteady. It was a signal so faint that it could have easily been missed. He adjusted his rifle, his finger resting lightly on the trigger, and approached the source. Pushing aside a broken wall panel, David found her, a small alien girl, huddled amidst the wreckage. She was frail, with delicate, pale gray skin, and her large, tear-filled eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Two thin antennae twitched nervously atop her head. The sight of the soldier made her recoil, her small hands raised as if to shield herself. Hey, it's all right," David said softly, lowering his weapon. He switched on his external speakers to ensure she could hear him clearly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The alien child stared at him, eyes wide with a mix of terror and hope. Her clothing was torn and dirty, her small body shivering with cold and fear. She was alone, utterly vulnerable in this war zone. David knelt down slowly, making himself appear less intimidating. "Can you understand me?" he asked gently. The girl nodded hesitantly, though it was clear she was struggling. I understand some," she stuttered, her voice melodic yet trembling. David took a moment to assess the situation. She was clearly not one of the Xarnok. Her species was entirely different, smaller, and much more delicate. He wondered how she had survived amidst the carnage. "Where are your parents?" he asked, though he already feared the answer. "Gone," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The monsters. They took everyone, killed everyone." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she began to sob quietly. David's heart clenched. He had seen horrors in this war, cities burned to ash, soldiers torn apart by plasma fire, families obliterated. But this was different. This was a child, alone and terrified, caught in a conflict she couldn't understand. Carefully, he reached out to her. At first, she flinched, but then, sensing the gentleness in his eyes, she allowed him to lift her into his arms. She was so light, he could barely feel her weight. As soon as she realized he wasn't going to hurt her, she buried her face into his shoulder and clung to him desperately. No family, no home," she sobbed, her small frame trembling against his armor. "Please, you be father?" David froze. He wasn't sure he had heard her right. The desperation in her voice, the way she clutched at him, broke through the emotional walls he'd built up over years of warfare. He had lost his own family back on Earth years ago. They were just another casualty of a different battle in this endless war. He thought he had nothing left to lose. But this little alien girl was asking him for something he hadn't thought he could ever give again, a connection, a bond. It wasn't something he could just walk away from. "All right," David said finally, his voice soft but firm. "I'll protect you. But we have to get out of here first. Can you hold on to me?" The girl nodded, her large eyes filled with gratitude. She wrapped her thin arms around his neck, holding on as if he were her last hope. David adjusted his grip and began making his way back to the rendezvous point where his squad awaited extraction. As David approached the base camp, Corporal Ramirez was the first to spot him. Her eyebrows shot up at the sight of the child clinging to him. Sarge? What's that?" "She's coming with us," David said, his tone brooking no argument. "She's got no one else?" Captain Hughes, their gruff commanding officer, came forward with a scowl. "Thompson, you know the protocol. We can't just take in refugees, especially an alien child." David took a deep breath. He knew he was stepping into dangerous territory, but the feel of the girl's small, trembling body against his chest strengthened his resolve. "With all due respect, sir, I'm taking responsibility for her," he said firmly. "I can't just leave her here to die." The captain stared at him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "Fine," he muttered. "But she's your responsibility, Thompson. One slip-up, and she's out." David nodded, relief flooding through him. He looked down at the girl, who gazed back up at him with wide, trusting eyes. "It's okay," he whispered to her. "You're safe now." Over the following weeks, the little alien girl, who David learned was named Lira, became a familiar face around the base. She was shy at first, sticking close to David, but slowly she began to open up. The soldiers, hardened by years of war, found themselves softened by her presence. Ramirez would share her ration bars with Lira, while another soldier, Jenkins, taught her simple games. But at night, the nightmares would come. Lira would wake up screaming, haunted by the memories of her home being destroyed. Each time, David would hold her close, whispering words of comfort until she fell back asleep in his arms. "You've really gone soft, Thompson," Ramirez teased one day as David helped Lira learn to write in English. "Never thought I'd see you playing daddy." David just smiled, watching Lira's antennae twitch with concentration as she practiced her letters. "Maybe it's time I try to build something," he replied quietly. "Something worth fighting for." Months later, the final battle with the Xarnok came. The United Terran forces launched a massive offensive that drove the invaders off Vexilin 7. When the dust settled, David stood on the battlefield, his armor scorched and battered. Lira was by his side, her small hand clutching his tightly. "Is it over?" Lira asked, her eyes wide with hope. David looked down at the child he had come to think of as his own. He ruffled her hair gently and smiled. "Yeah, kiddo, it's over." Lyra's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. She hugged him fiercely, her small arms barely reaching around his chest. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. In that moment, David realized that amidst all the destruction and loss, he had found something precious. Lira had given him a reason to keep going, a reason to live. And as he held her close, he knew that he would protect her no matter what the future held. For in this war-torn galaxy, he had finally found something worth living for, and someone worth dying for.